Welcome to the Cynical Developer Live. This is the podcast that helps you improve your development knowledge and career through explaining the latest and greatest in development technology, providing you with what you need to succeed as a developer. In this 4-part mini-series, we're recording in person at Percone Live Europe 2019 in Amsterdam. In this episode, we're at Percone Live Europe and we're joined by Pavel Genov. And we're here to talk about migrating from on-prem or dedicated servers to the cloud. And it's quite a big topic, so we're not going to go into too much detail about it because we'd be here for weeks. But Pavel is a goal-orientated software development leader with experience of leading many teams in the creation of successful software products during every lifecycle stage. He has a strong background in software development, several programming languages, networking, cloud, and telecommunications, as well as different software development approaches like Agile Scrum. So welcome to the Cynical Developer, Pavel.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time out away from the conference to come and speak to me. You know, it's very demanding, these events. You know, you want to get into talks, you're giving talks yourself, and you've got to prep everything, and everybody wants to grab a piece of your time and talk to you. So I'm very honoured that you've taken the time to come and talk to us about this topic today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, not a problem. So for those listeners that are maybe on the very first step of their journey, they don't really know too much yet, could you tell me what the cloud is?
Yeah. Well, the cloud is basically a regular data center managed usually by a big company, and you have access to a lot of functionality that is usually through an API. You could get a new server, or you could return back another server. So usually that's what the main points are, at least to me.
Sure. So along with the buzzword of the cloud, we also hear the term serverless. Now, how can something have no server? Surely it really means not my server, but it doesn't quite sound as cool as serverless. Is that what that is?
Yeah, like basically in the cloud you could use stateless or like stateful machines. Like it all depends how your application is going to work. If you are using the serverless environment, you're definitely going to gain a lot of the bonuses that you could gain from a cloud. Happily, Pepper used a serverless environment even before we moved to the cloud. So now with the migration, we actually are having more benefits than we expected even.
Sure.
But serverless is definitely a server,
right?
That you don't own anyway.
Yeah. It's not like you deploying something to a USB key and sticking it in a drawer somewhere. You know, it is exactly on a physical server somewhere in the world.
Yeah.
And I guess does that all link in with a similar thing as like content delivery networks? It's on somebody else's network somewhere else, and it should always be highly available.
Correct.
Cool. So for businesses that haven't yet made that jump, you know, why should they be looking to move to the cloud? What are the benefits of that?
Yeah. So myself, I was not the biggest fan of clouds. We have been running the product for 15 years. For 14 and a half, we run on-premise. Sure. And I'm a big fan of on-premise. We have automated everything. But then there is a certain moment of time where the cost of ownership is becoming really high if you're running on-premise. So that's the time when you have to calculate, okay, am I spending too much time in repetitive tasks, or is it better for me to just switch and outsource those repetitive tasks to someone else, like AWS, Google Cloud? There is many providers. So for us, the biggest benefit is that we don't manage anymore the hardware itself, and that gives us a lot of benefit. We don't need to scale the team. We could simply put a credit card and work with that.
Sure. You don't need the people that are experts in Linux or Microsoft Windows Server or anything like that.
Well, I think you do. You definitely need experts. The thing is that you don't need experts anymore into managing, let's say, physical rights or networking on a level of, okay, where is my server position in the data center? Is the rack cooling working or not? Like we had this type of problems before. Now, like if the server has some trouble with the hardware itself, it's just going to be shut down. You spawn another one, done.
Right. Okay. So one of the key points I think you mentioned there is that on-premise becomes expensive. Now, a lot of people will go to like the Azure cost calculators and things like that and see that really cloud is quite expensive to run compared to a lot of dedicated servers and on-premise stuff. How does that cost get justified?
Yeah. For us, it was the same. Like we paid X amount of money per month for the dedicated providers, like the dedicated machines. The moment we moved to the cloud, we start paying probably twice more.
Yep.
The justification comes from the fact that if we wanted to continue running on premise, we had to hire additional people within the team, and that, in terms of costs, would be very similar.
Right,
but what we have had as part of this decision is how faster we will progress forward. With the cloud, this will be a click of a button, an API call, or just purely automation. With the on-prem, that could take a day or two, right? So this is how you justify the cost, at least for us. Again, the price for a server is sometimes even 10 times higher on cloud providers than on-prem, but the overall cost for the whole month, given the fact that you could work with a lot less people, is becoming like something now you can work with.
So I think there's 2 points there. One is that it's convenient and it's quick and you've got stuff straight away. You know, I've worked in businesses where it's been on-prem and we've needed another server because we're under high load, but we can't just go and switch on another server. We need to buy the hardware, it needs to get shipped in, it needs to get put together. We need somebody down at the data center, whether they work there, whether they're an employee of the company, to set it all up. 6 weeks later, you've got your server, but it was 6 weeks ago that you had that demand. So yeah, I can see that as a massive benefit. And getting the staff in with the expertise to be able to drop into a data center and install that stuff as well. You don't have that run-up time, because if you needed to upscale your team to deal with more servers, you've got that latency where you've got to get those team members up to speed with how you do your infrastructure, how your business works. And I guess you don't need that because you're clicking one button. It runs the same as everything else, and it's all in some sort of management console.
Correct. Well, another point I need to add here is like, it's not as smooth and as simple as it sounds on the marketing pages of the cloud providers. So if you have a team that has been working for years with on-prem, all the internal process, all the internal knowledge is dedicated towards those on-prem machines. So this transition is not only like a big change for the hardware and the way we write software, it's also a big change for the internal process and how we do daily operations. And yes, of course, that's something really important I forgot to mention. It does change the code as well. There is applications that work very efficient on the cloud, and there is some that are written specifically for on-prem, and they don't run that efficient.
Sure.
So this needs to be taken into account.
Yeah, so it's not always a case of lift and shift and it will just work.
It was not for us.
Yeah. I guess the closest that you would get to doing that is if you were running something like VMs in the cloud and not taking full advantage of the features and that are available to you.
Correct.
Sure. So, is the cloud solution for everybody? Should all businesses be looking to move there, or are there instances where you would personally advise that they don't move to the cloud? It's just not for them.
We run a website. It's quite popular. We have around 25 million unique visitors monthly. So for us, the move to the cloud was a good thing. I believe that into the web environment, for many companies, once they reach a certain level of popularity, let's say this way, they should do the calculations on their own, and they will see whether for them there is a benefit. Another big part of where we spend a lot of workloads is analytics. On the analytics sides, probably like we run on-prem still for the analytics, but probably there is another level which when we reach, we will need to look onto the cloud as well.
Sure.
So for the different industries, these are the two I could talk. There is different threshold where it actually will make sense.
Okay. So for a company to move, really, if they've got everything set up as on-prem, and if that's working for them, that's great. Don't necessarily make the jump. But if you're in a high demand industry, or your site's just very popular, that's probably a good use case to actually do that jump, because you can, as we said earlier, just spin up new instances if you need to, as long as you've got your configuration in code.
Correct. Also, like I remember, like 1.5 years ago, we were smaller, we had less traffic, and then Black Friday came, and then like we know very well, we usually jump on traffic by 500-600% on that one day. Yes, and we had everything under control, everything worked perfect, and then we reached the network capacity of the data center. There is nothing you can do at that moment other than just hold the table.
Yeah.
With the cloud providers, what we have seen so far is that the hardware that they provide is extremely good. It's extremely expensive itself. Yeah. So the capabilities that you think you have with your on-prem data center, they're not bad. But with the cloud, you have some hidden things that are additional bonus, additional sugar to the whole benefit. Okay. And networking is one of them. Like, we used a quite big data center in Germany. A lot of companies use that. But their internal network was 1 gigabit that they've provided. Yep. With AWS, you start with like 3,000 megabits or 7,500. It depends which instance types you use. Sure. Up to like 20,000.
Right. So you get a bigger pipe coming into your servers as well.
Yes.
So I guess that one way that people often deal with that situation is that they would have it over multi-locations, different data centers dealing with different geolocations for people coming into it. Is that something that the cloud gives you out of the box, that it would automatically go, well, we'll serve these people from the United States with the United States, and we'll serve them from Europe to a Europe cloud?
Yes, it gives a lot of benefit on that. Like, we have the most popular websites are here in Europe, but we're quite big in Korea. Okay. As well as in Spain, in Mexico and Brazil. And in Europe, we were pretty good in choosing a data center, but in South America, for us, it was very difficult to find one. So in some locations, we run data centers that we knew from before, in some brand new ones, and they all come with their own problems, with their own configurational systems, with their own set of contacts, and that was very time consuming. With a global provider, you simplify this by a lot. So you could have internal processes that work everywhere around the world. So this is another good benefit for us.
So we've mentioned that when you move to the cloud, that your data is no longer on your servers, it's on somebody else's servers. And a lot of industries are scared of that because they feel that they no longer control their data. Is that true? Is that something that they should be worried about? Or is it fear of the unknown? They just don't really understand what the service is?
We don't worry for that at all. Before the data centers that we use, we rented the servers from them. So they weren't ours.
Sure.
With AWS or with Google or with any other provider, they're certified by all the certification you would need to have to run particular workloads, whether you are a financial provider, whether you are a website like the one that we have. I'm pretty confident to say you don't need to worry about this.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, because I work with a client who is in fintech, and they're looking to move to the cloud, but everything has to go through auditing and to be signed off, and it's a 6-month process. And I think for the likes of myself as a developer, that's quite frustrating, because you think this stuff is built by companies bigger than you with more concerns than you have. It's probably secure, but they still need to go through and do due diligence
Yeah.
and things, and it's sort of poked with a very long stick until they know what it is.
But that's not a bad thing in my opinion. Like, yes, if I put my money in some other company like my bank,
Yeah.
I would like them to check
Yes.
where they're gonna host that. Whether that's the easiest thing, well, it's not that easy. I agree. It's gonna be a little bureaucracy, but it's possible.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess you mentioned there about working with your bank and that, and there's an app that people seem to use at the moment where when you make a payment, it rounds it up to the nearest like whole pound or whole dollar, and takes the excess and puts it in a pot for you as a bit of a savings scheme. And that scares the hell out of me because it's somebody else dealing with my money and touching my money. They're like a middleman there. And I guess that's a similar situation there where these companies feel that their data is being poked and prodded by someone else. And the reality is they're not interested really in your data. It's just information flowing over a line.
Correct.
Sure. Now, this is definitely a large, broad question, but what are some of the common pitfalls that people fall into when they decide to make that move from on-prem to cloud?
Mm-hmm. I would say the first thing that was a problem for Peppa, it was the fact that we changed every single thing we do internally changed from today to tomorrow drastically. Like how we deploy a new server. It used to be you make a phone call.
Yep.
Now it's a click of a button or an automation. So it changed quite a lot of the infrastructure as code. Like we had to change a lot of that. We changed completely our monitoring. Before we had to monitor, let's say, telemetry data of the physical machines, like is the fan working or not?
Yes.
Now we don't.
Right.
The companies we worked with to do those things, they changed as well. There was a big switch. But I would say the most important is the fact that the monitoring changed, the internal process. And on-prem, once you have a problem with your server, you try to fix it, right? With the cloud, you don't. You shut it down, you provision another one, done. In 5 minutes, you're done.
Right.
So this mentality of like having a server and trying to work with that server with whatever you have with the cloud must be changed from the ground. Like you should not be attached to any running instance. That's why probably they don't call it even server. It's called instance. So you don't get attached to those.
Right. Okay. So is that something for systems administrators and the infrastructure teams to be concerned about? Because previously, a lot of their time and their effort was spent on monitoring the servers, making sure that the sub-networks were all talking together, maybe tweaking them, doing things like that. Now that's all gone. Is it something they need to be worried about? Where do they now sit in the team? Or is it a case that job doesn't exist for them anymore?
They need to be worried. They need to be worried. I hope they worry. But how to say? Before they had to know even a lot more information to manage all those. Let's take, for example, the security part and configuring the firewalls and the NATs. In one data center, they would have like one particular model of one particular brand. In another, there's going to be another one. Yeah. So now they have to work with two. With the cloud, they work with an API that basically masks everything for them. And I think that's pretty good. What's important for them is that their knowledge that they had and practices until the moment we switched, they basically had no knowledge for the new things that are gonna come. So each company has to take a step back and realize this. Okay, we're giving a brand new hammer for this team.
Yep.
To be able for them to work efficiently and as good as they were before, we need to invest in their training.
Yes.
And so this was very important.
Okay. So we've talked about that the migrations happen and it's not always a case of copy paste, job done. Are there any tools out there to help you with the migration, or is this a big exercise of let's plan, let's manually do this, and there's a lot of people working on it. So could I go out and go, well, I want to do this product that's on-prem and port it to cloud? Does that even exist?
Yes, there is such services. I know that Amazon have a service like this that they even provide. We have never used it.
Right, okay.
I don't know how reliable they are. If there are services globally available, they must work. We did almost everything manually. And we did it step by step. We started with, let's say, our object storage. Then we moved the databases. Then we moved, let's say, search and Elasticsearch. Yeah. And at the end, we moved the whole workload on the web traffic. So slowly, it was possible. It wasn't hard.
Right. It's not a big bang thing. It's not like, well, today we're on-prem, and tomorrow we're going to be in the cloud and everything's in there and that's
correct.
Job done. It is a journey rather than just flick a switch and all.
Yes. For us, it took around 6 months of research state and training as well. It was before we moved, and then the actual move took around 90 days.
Right. Okay. So even then, it's not a long time really to get everything up there and running. Okay. So there are a lot of different options for cloud. There's public clouds, there's private clouds. You've got GCP, which is Google, AWS, which is Amazon, and you've got Microsoft Azure as well. How do you make a decision on which one to go with?
This was the question for $1 million.
Yeah.
So for Peppa, we started with what are the services we need. Then we filter out the providers that have them. Then we filter out like what and when do we need that. At the last step, we look at cost and what would be the knowledge we'll start. I personally was pushing for Google Cloud. The team was pushing for AWS.
Okay.
At the end, we are using. At the end, we are using AWS.
Right. Okay.
And I think the biggest reason for that is that they had certification for AWS in advance, and they were a lot more familiar, a lot more feeling comfortable with AWS. But I think both of the providers, or like all of the providers, they have their own uniquenesses and services. And for each company and each industry, there will be different important points that they will look at.
So like almost every question in tech, the answer is, it depends.
It depends.
Yeah. Okay. So a term that is being bandied around in nearly every single talk I've seen over this event is multi-cloud and vendor lock-in. So multi-cloud is sort of self-explanatory a little bit, that you have your system across multiple different cloud providers. But I thought the whole idea behind the cloud was that it was always available. And if it's always available, why do I need to be on more than one provider?
I cannot answer this question, to be honest, from other people.
Sure.
We don't do multi-cloud. We do multi-cloud in a sense of we have a certain separate workloads that we run in one cloud and other workloads in another location. We still do it. Our web traffic, user-facing product, that could have a spike in traffic by 5 to 10 times in a matter of 10 minutes. That works in a cloud. But the analytical workloads, the BI, data science, that all sits onto premise. So in this scenario, as a company, we are multi-cloud. But as one product, it is not multi-cloud.
Sure.
What we do, which is kind of a multi-cloud, but not exactly, is a pretty good disaster recovery plan.
Okay.
So you can run your workloads, let's say in the regions around Frankfurt, and then like being able to switch everything to Ireland. But that does not fit the exact term of multi-cloud and the purpose of it.
Yeah, I think many years ago I was involved with a small web hosting company. I was one of the directors for it. And we had an issue where our data center was in the UK, and the main pipe for the internet that came into the UK went down, and all the servers went off for our clients. The data center wouldn't pay out because the SLA was your server is still up, but people in the United States couldn't access it. They couldn't access it in other parts of the world. So I guess that multi-cloud gives you that, as you say, that disaster recovery. When something like that happens, you can pull something up somewhere else. When I first heard about it and this vendor lock-in type thing, I didn't know if it was maybe a little bit of scaremongering, a little bit of hype around it, a bit like when people say when you're designing your software, you should always make it so that you can pull out the data layer and put in a new data layer. I've been doing this for 20 odd years, and I think I've come across one or two people that have ever changed their database on a product. And if they're going to do that, they don't swap it out, they build a new product. So it's like, really, this vendor lock-in, is it scaremongering? I don't know.
Fully agree with you. I also have never seen it.
Yeah.
There is a vendor locking for us as well, though. It won't be on the database particular, but it would be, let's say, on the deployment, right? Or into the way we orchestrate our Docker instances. Sure. We use as I said, we use Amazon. We use ECS. If we were on Google Cloud, we would have used Kubernetes.
Yeah.
So there is a certain amount of vendor lock, but the way I think about vendor lock is how much it's going to cost us to move to another cloud.
Yeah.
And then it's a pretty easy to calculate and have a number and say, okay, this is the risk I'm going to own myself of choosing this provider. And if something goes wrong, if I decide to move to another, this is the initial investment I need to do to move.
Sure. So yeah, you talked about vendor locking. You're with AWS, and you talked about builds, and I guess that if you're in AWS, you're probably using I think it's called AWS Build and AWS Deploy, and it's everything. You have to you've bought in, drank the Kool-Aid for absolutely everything that they offer, and I think it makes it probably a big job to move away. And that scares me a little bit. I worked with a company that did that. They had their own build servers, and they were in the cloud, but they managed their own CI/CD pipelines, and it was run with things like TeamCity and Octopus Deploy, and then they moved over to the AWS things. And what scares me about it is that at that point, that's the vendor lock-in, that you've now changed all your configuration, all your build stuff away from what was a third party, so it wasn't too tightly coupled, to you're using Amazon and that's all you're using. And Amazon's not going to go anywhere overnight. It's a big enough company to deal with that. But I think it's still a concern at times. Maybe it's unfounded concern, but it worries me a little bit. I don't like to buy in whole hog to these things.
Yeah.
I do it in my personal life. I've got Amazon devices, Kindles, and the Echo devices and things like that. And then I was looking at putting in networks, and Google's got this device, and I've got that with that, and everyone's, I use Google Home, and I was like, Google have already got enough information on me. I'm going to use somebody else. I don't like to have everything by the same vendor. They sort of take over your life a little bit.
Yeah. For the deploys, for example, what we've taken as a step to eliminate as much as we can from the vendor lock, many years ago we started using GitLab. We never went away. Yeah. So we use GitLab with its own CI/CD system, and that eliminates this part of the deployment process, right, okay, like building and testing and deploying.
Yep.
What I meant by deploying is just the last step, like all your APIs, all your switching of load balancers, and that's what the vendor lock is. Like, there is a lot of the things which you can still take and work. Still, you can run your CI/CD on the cloud, on cloud machines, whether they will be ECS, Kubernetes, doesn't matter. But they could be orchestrated or operated from a third-party provider, like open source provider would be good. We use GitLab.
Sure. Okay. And sort of sticking with the multi-cloud thing, not all providers provide the same functionality. So how do people deal with that? You might be using one flavor of a database system on AWS, and Azure have a similar one, but it's called something different, so it does different features. But then even their file storages are very different. Surely that's a big job to manage that side of it.
Correct. That was the first 6 months of our migration.
Right.
This research in advance and identifying what are the exact needs of your product or a company is very important for choosing a provider. It doesn't matter even whether it's going to be a cloud provider, for it's applicable to any other decision you're making. So the way we have done the decision is, or the unique selling product of Amazon for us is Amazon Aurora.
Sure.
The other providers do not have, at least to our knowledge, such a cloud scalable, natively scalable product that emulates MySQL as Amazon. And for the web traffic, this is a big improvement for us.
Sure. So we're almost out of time. And as I said at the start, it's a big topic, and it's hard to squeeze that all into to 30 minutes or so and cover everything. But as some final words of wisdom for any of the listeners out there that they're looking to make that jump, what would be the things that you would advise them to do?
Very important is to know what you actually would expect from the provider you're going to choose. Make your research in advance. Identify what are the products that you would like to use. Make sure your team is aware how to use them and how to manage them, how to secure them, and calculate the cost. There is, in my opinion, nothing scary to try. Start with something small and go bigger.
Sure. Great. Well, thank you very much for taking time out to come and talk to me today. It's been interesting. It's covered off a few of my concerns and my questions around cloud, because it is a big, scary thing. So thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to everyone out there for listening to The Cynical Developer. I'm James Stoddart, and you've been listening to Pavel Genov talking about moving to the cloud.
If you have any questions about this or any other episode, then drop us an email, a tweet, or leave a comment on the website, where you can find all the resource links, show notes for each episode. And if you enjoy this episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is, and help The Cynical Developer to reach more developers around the globe.